A lot of people think higher grading fees mean fewer opportunities or that grading is impossible, and the reality is that just isn't true. So there are plenty of cards that still have incredible grading numbers, even if you're looking at paying a higher fee for a faster turnaround. So in this video, I'm going to show you some of the cards that still have strong grading metrics, even at the $80 per card level, and I'll explain specifically what I'm looking for and some of the traps to watch out for when putting together a grading submission at this level. Now, what makes a card a strong grading candidate when we're buying online to grade? So there are really only three things I'm looking for. The first is high gem rates. So the gem rate is the number of total gem mint grades, like PSA 10s, divided by the total number of cards graded. It's kind of like the success rate for that card, and it really just shows us how that card is grading so far. Higher gem rates suggest that it's going to be a little bit easier to find that card in clean, raw condition. A card with a lower gem rate usually means the opposite, where it might just be a little bit trickier to find clean copies out there. So because I don't have unlimited time, I really just want to focus on cards with higher gem rates. There's really no hard rule here, but I personally like to target cards with at least a 50% gem rate. And if I can find something with a 60% gem rate or above, that's even better. The second thing I'm looking for is strong upside. So when I get the grade that I'm looking for, I want to make sure that I'm winning big. There's nothing worse than spending the time and money to find a card, send it off, get it graded, get a PSA 10, and still not make very much on the back end. Like, that's just a waste of time. So I'm looking for cards where I know I'm going to win big when I get a PSA 10. And just like gem rate, usually the higher the better, but the rule that I like to live by is what I call the 2x rule. So I'm looking for cards where the PSA 10 is worth at least double the raw cost plus the grading fee. Now, when we're paying bigger grading fees, we need to have that high upside to help absorb the cost of grading. And high upside cards also help us when things go wrong. So if we get a card that we can't grade or that comes back a 9 instead of a 10, or if the market shifts a little bit, we've just got more buffer to make sure we still win on that play. And then third, and hopefully this goes without saying, but we only want to target the clean, centered looking copies of the cards that we find. So just finding one with strong upside and a high gem rate is great, but we can't just buy any old card that looks like garbage out there. We've got to find the ones that actually look like they have a realistic chance at a PSA 10. If I already know going into a submission that I'm going to be paying a higher grading fee, that makes me even more picky because there's extra risk. If I come back with a 9 instead of a 10, I just paid a higher grading fee to get a grade that's not going to add any value to the card, or at least not much. That's not what we're going for here. So I want to make sure that I'm truly confident in the card before I even make the purchase. Now, I've got other videos on my channel that show how I evaluate conditions, so that's not really what this video is about today. If you want to watch one of those, I'll leave a link in the description, but it looks something like this. But today we're focused on card selection because that's really the most important thing if you're trying to grade for profit. Now, the old school way of finding cards that have high gem rates and strong upside was to basically start with the gem rate and then cross-reference with your favorite comp tool to make sure that the upside is actually there. And this absolutely works. It's what I did myself for years. But the problem is that it takes a lot of time. So I actually built a software called Coin that automates a lot of that research and shows you a ranked list of cards with strong grading metrics based on the current market. Now, normally the list looks a little something like this, but with the way that PSA has recently changed some of their turnarounds and paused some of the cheaper options, we actually already built in a list that specifically shows cards that make sense even at the $80 grading fee level. So you're going to see a lot of higher values, a lot of higher upside cards in here, where they can easily absorb that $80 grading fee. So this is what I'm going to be working off of today. And by the way, if you want to follow along, I'll leave a link in the description where you can grab a free trial of Coin and see what you think. All right, let's dig into some of these cards. All right, so the first thing we're going to do here is I'm going to add a couple of filters so that we can make sure we're looking at just the types of cards that we really want. So I'm going to go gem rate greater than, I'm going to go 45. I know I said 50, but this is going to give us a few more cards to choose from. Sometimes there's cards that have such strong upside that it's worth stretching the gem rate a little bit. And then the other one I'm going to add is for PSA 10 multiplier greater than or equal to 2. And then apply filters, and oh no, all of the cards are gone. There are no cards that have good metrics with an $80 grading fee, right? Wrong. There's dozens of them in this tool alone, right? So let's start going through some of these cards. So the Ohtani on the top is interesting to me because there are always people that want to buy Ohtani cards. So he's a really easy player to move. And the thing that's tough about Ohtani rookie cards, especially from 2018, is they are cards that were graded quite a bit over the years. And they're also almost 10 years old at this point. So it's probably a little bit less likely that we're going to find clean raw copies of these cards. However, what I like about these couple of cards on the top is that these weren't as big of parallels back when they first came out. Like this card on top isn't actually his primary rookie card. It's an insert for him going on a 3-game streak with a home run back in 2018. So what I like about that is this wasn't the type of card that people would have immediately graded when it was 2018, when this was fresh out of the pack, or even the years that followed. This is really only becoming a card that's worth grading because of Ohtani's recent market surge, where just about anything with that guy's name on it is going to sell for a bunch of money. So that gives me a little bit more confidence about this card that I may actually be able to find clean copies, even though our set age indicator is already flagging for us that we're going to have a little bit of a tougher time finding those. The other thing is I know he started off really hot this year pitching wise, but I know he was also a little bit slower than usual at the plate. And our player insights here are flagging for us that over the last 15 games, he's actually picking it up quite a bit. So not that we had any doubts that Ohtani would be a good player, but with that, I'm okay with looking at this card and I'm off to eBay. The other thing is our grading tier efficiency at the top is actually suggesting that this may be a better play at the $150 level rather than the $80 level, because across a full year, we would actually end up netting more money, assuming that current values hold, which we know that they don't always. So this is just kind of a projection more than anything, but it's designed to help you compare different turnaround levels. All right, what about this Schlittler card? So he's a guy that I'm actually not as interested in. He's absolutely dominating right now, but he's a guy that's also unproven. So where Ohtani could get injured and his season could be over and his values probably wouldn't move a whole lot, Schlittler is a guy that needs to continue to put up numbers if we want to see some of these big prices hold. So this is a card that I would personally probably skip, even though the grading numbers suggest that it's a strong play. All right, what about this Ohtani 2024 Topps Chrome Refractor? Well, the numbers are crazy good, so this is a play that's really appealing to me. Normally, I'm not a huge fan of non-rookie stuff, but again, Ohtani is kind of the outlier here. So that's a guy where I could easily see justifying going after some of his cards. So we'll click over to eBay here and take a look at some of those as well. All right, what about this Curry card here? So what I like about it is it's Steph Curry, a guy that's also always in demand. And it's also an iconic pose. So even though this isn't a rookie card, it's one that I like quite a bit better than your average non-rookie card, just because it's a pose that I think a lot of people are interested in. The other thing that I love about this card is almost an 80% gem rate. So really strong gem rate here and some really nice PSA 10. So this is the type of card that I'm a big fan of, and this is easily one that I'll add to my list to take a look at. All right, what about this Wembanyama Prism Monopoly Silver here? It has decent grading metrics all the way around, strong gem rate. The thing that I don't like about this card is I really just don't like the Monopoly set. It's not nearly as liquid as the normal Prism base set, and even though we're getting a discount compared to a normal Prism Silver, it's just not my favorite product. So even though it has strong grading metrics, it's not for me personally. All right, what about this hockey card down here? So we've got a 50% gem rate and over $1,000 of PSA 10 margin. So when you want to talk about high upside, that one fits the mold pretty nicely. The problem is I don't know hockey personally, and I just choose to not deal in categories that I don't fully understand. And so for that reason, even though this is a really strong grading opportunity from the numbers alone, this one is also not for me, so I'm passing on that card. All right, back to another Wemby. So I actually like Select as a decent pivot away from Prism where you can get a cheaper buy-in and still have some strong upside and some decent demand. So 65% gem rate makes me really happy. And there's also about $500 of PSA 10 margin here. So that's really easy to absorb that $80 grading fee. And so at the time of this recording, Wemby has taken the Spurs to the NBA Finals. And so based on the outcome there, that could have an impact on this card. The thing that I don't really mind is that Wemby is only 22 years old. He's kind of the up-and-coming face of the league, so I really don't have a whole lot of concern that even if they get swept in the finals, I don't think this card is going to fall off very much, if at all. I think he's going to be right back in the center of things going into next season, and I'm not even sure at this point if his cards are going to fall off in the offseason at all, based on what he's shown us he's capable of at such a young age. I think the cat's completely out of the bag with him. And of course, I could be wrong, but I personally don't have a whole lot of concern, so that's another one that I would definitely add to my list of cards to go and look for on eBay. All right, let's go down the list a little bit here and find some more. So what about this Paige Becker's second year Prism logo card? This is actually a pretty cool card. Just about a 50% gem rate, so not terrible. This is way better than last year's Prism product. And this is looking like a pretty strong opportunity from a numbers standpoint. Now, the reason why I'm going to pass on this one is even though she's a really good player, it's a second year card, and second year cards tend to not hold value quite as well unless you're truly like the best of the best of the best players. And while Paige Beckers is actually probably getting close to being in that category in the WNBA, the star power in the WNBA isn't the same as in MLB or NBA or NFL, at least not yet. Maybe you can make that argument for Kaylin Clark, but I just haven't seen the depth of market for any of the other players yet. So I'd have a little bit of concern about this card holding value as more PSA 10 copies hit the market. I feel like as we see dozens of this card and eventually maybe hundreds of this card as PSA 10s, this 750 price won't be there anymore. So for that reason, this is a skip to me. All right, Roman Anthony, Bowman Chrome Auto, really good prospect, guy that I like quite a bit. And I think that this is the type of card that I would buy it if I could find clean raw copies, because again, we're looking at about $1,000, maybe even a little bit more here as far as PSA 10 margin goes, over 50% gem rate. My concern is that this is the type of card that was widely graded, even out of the pack. He's been a big name prospect for a few years, and so I think we're going to have a little bit tougher time finding clean raw copies of this card. The thing that I like in a backwards way is he hasn't had a great start to the 2026 season, and he's also been on the injured list a little bit, so that makes people a little bit less excited about his cards, and therefore we may have a better opportunity to find a clean copy with less competition. But the hard part is going to be actually finding a clean copy of that card. So that's one that's definitely worth a look to me, but I'm not holding my breath that I'm going to be able to find clean copies. Jackson Dart, Prism Silver, really strong prospect, but he's the type of guy that is completely unproven in the NFL so far. And so despite some really strong numbers here, gem rate just around 50%, so that's not terrible, especially when we're looking at almost $700, $600 of PSA 10 margin. I don't want to target this card personally. And the reason is because I'm concerned that I wouldn't have that card back until into the season. And if this guy goes out and is bad in the first few weeks, look out below, his values will be falling sharply. And so for the more proven players, like when we were looking at Otani and Wembanyama and Steph Curry up here, no concerns there. But when we're looking at a guy that still has a ton to prove, his values are selling as if he's already a star. And if he doesn't come out and meet or exceed the market's already high expectations for him when the season starts, that's when we usually see a sharp drop off in values. And what I don't want is a situation where if he gets hurt or isn't very good for the start of the season, then I'm sitting there with my card at PSA waiting in line to be graded and it's dropping in real time and I can't do anything about it. So I do like grading the prospects for each of the sports in the offseason. I just want to make sure I have my card back and can sell it before the season begins. So selling into that strength, that preseason hype, that's usually the turnaround time that I'm looking for. And so for all those reasons, I am passing on this particular card. All right, another one down here, and this one's kind of fun. This Shohei Ohtani 2018 Topps Update Legends in the Making Blue. And the reason why this one's fun is because I actually just got one back from grading and got a PSA 10. So this goes back to what we were talking about earlier, where sometimes these sets that go a little bit under the radar initially can be really strong grading plays when the player blows up the way that Ohtani has, because those cards did not get widely graded initially. And that means that those cards have just been sitting there in clean condition where they weren't worth grading previously, but now all of a sudden they are. And so you can still find clean gradable copies of them out there. Another good recent example of this was Cal Raleigh, who back in 2022, when his rookie cards came out, he wasn't that big of a deal. Like, he was a solid prospect and he ended up becoming a really solid player where he was hitting 25 to 30 homers and won a Gold Glove or two, if I'm not mistaken. But he wasn't the type of player that really drove interest in the card market until he hit 60 home runs in a season. So while he was hitting 60 home runs, those cards started to jump up really quickly. All of his 2022 stuff that previously went ungraded because it just wasn't worth it out of the packs. He wasn't a guy that people were chasing. But because the values jumped way up, that meant that you had an opportunity to go back in time and find those 2022 cards that went ungraded that were still sitting there in clean gradable condition. And that was a play that Coin called out during the season that a lot of our Coin users took advantage of and made some pretty good money off of. So it's kind of a sneaky play, but don't sleep on the cards like this because there is some upside there. Even though this Ohtani is 8 years old, you can still find clean copies, especially if some of those secondary inserts and the parallels of those inserts. All right, let's do a couple more. I'm looking for one or two more cards to add to my list of cards that I'm going to try to find for this submission. So what about this Tyler Shuck? So really strong grading metrics. Again, $200 raw and looking at almost $550 for a PSA 10 and a 67% gem rate. So 2 out of 3 of these so far at least have been getting PSA 10s. So even with an $80 grading fee, that leaves us in a pretty solid spot. The problem is, same thing as that Jackson Dart card we already talked about, I'm not sold on Shuck. He's not proven, so it's not a guy that I really want to put a bunch of money into and have sitting at PSA when the season starts. So for that reason, I'm going to pass on his card. All right, what about this Bo Nix downtown here? So Nix also isn't super proven, but he's done quite a bit more than the guys that are going from their rookie year to year two. Nix himself had a huge leap between his rookie season and his year two, and now going into year three, he's a much more stable player, if you ask me, compared to some of those guys that really haven't proven that much yet. I also love the numbers on this thing. So we're looking at something like $1,200 if we get a PSA 10 on one of these. So the gem rate's only 47% here. That's not awful, but what makes me like this card is that we make about $1,200 every time we get a PSA 10. And even if the season starts before we get our cards back, I don't imagine that if Nix has a slow start to the season that this is going to fall off too much. It's always possible, but when there's this much upside, usually that puts us in a pretty good spot to turn a pretty meaningful profit, even if you were to fall off a little bit once the season starts. And if this is your first time getting into the higher dollar turnarounds, the turnaround time really is faster. So we're looking about a 25-day turnaround time based on the express level here. And that actually would put us in a position where, based on the current timeline here, we would have this card before the season starts. And if you want to know kind of the peaks and valleys of the card market, it's built into the calendar here. But if we're sitting here in June and then we're getting this card back in about a month, maybe a month and a few weeks, we're right at the peak timing right before the season, as long as we're sending at the express level. So overall, I like this play. This is another one that I would add to my list of cards to consider. All right, one more from this list. What about this Ohtani Topps update rookie debut? Again, it's not his primary update rookie card, but these also have really strong grading metrics. They're not hard to find. It's already popped 13,000, so it's not rare, and it still has a really strong gem rate. So even being 8 years old, this is another one where I actually recently graded a couple of copies of this exact card and got 2 PSA 10s on this thing. So really nice. I actually paid closer to 100. They continue to climb, but they're selling for almost 500 bucks as PSA 10s. So even with a higher grading fee, you end up making some pretty strong money here as long as you can find clean copies. So when I find a play that works, I also like to go back to the well and continue to hammer that play until it no longer works. So this is another card where I'm going to click over to eBay and see if I can find some more clean copies of that card. A lot of times people want to stop grading something because they've already sent it once or twice. And the thing is, like, man, if the numbers make sense, the numbers make sense. So don't stop unless there's a reason to. All right. Also, if you're a Pokemon person, we've got Pokemon inside of Coin as well. And some of the numbers here are absolutely silly if you look at the grading metrics and the gem rates on some of the Pokemon cards. So don't knock it till you've tried it. But this Meowth, for example, brand new card for 2026. So you can still find clean raw copies out there pretty easily. But how about an almost 86% gem rate? And it's a card where you're spending a little over $200 and you're getting somewhere close to 800 plus for this thing as a PSA 10. Makes it really easy to justify that bigger grading fee, right? So this is an easy one to add to the list of cards to at least consider if we can find any clean copies out there in the wild. Couple others a little further down the list. These are 2019 and 2018 cards, so it's going to be a little bit trickier to find those in clean gradable condition. It's not that you can't, it's just going to be a little bit tougher. So another one I like is this 2026 Mega Gengar EX, and this card has a 71% gem rate, so really strong right off the bat. About $100 or so ungraded right now, and you're looking at $400 to $500 for a PSA 10, so it's not hard to justify paying that $80 grading fee. And when you do pay the $80 grading fee, you end up getting the cards back way faster, so you can turn that money over and get to the next submission. Now, the one thing to look out for here is this set. I've noticed, despite the strong gem rate, a lot of these are really off center. So you want to be picky when you're looking at these cards and make sure you're getting a copy that's well centered and doesn't have any chipping or white spots on the back borders. But I've actually sent a couple copies of this myself that looked really clean, and I'm pretty excited about them just because it seems like such easy money here, assuming they do pull PSA 10s. So this is another one where I'm going back to the well and I'm happy to find more copies of that same card. So that's my process, guys. And really what we're doing here is we're trying to streamline the process. And that's the point of Coin, if you end up giving this a try, is it's going to just show you a ranked list of cards that have strong upside. So you don't have to spend hours in the pop report and trying to figure out where to even start. And I don't know, what would we pull, like 9-10 cards there in a matter of minutes, and that's with me giving my full internal monologue for each card. So we would have been able to go quite a bit faster. But the idea is that you can do the research step in seconds or minutes instead of hours. And then you're just onto eBay to find the clean copies of those cards. Now, keep in mind when we get into the higher grading levels, we may end up spending a little bit more money to make sure that we can truly justify that higher grading fee, but it also unlocks even bigger upside on the back end. So that's what's always exciting to me when I'm sending an order like this is I might spend $1,500, $2,000 on the front end to get 10, 15, 20 cards out the door. But on the back end, those cards could turn into $5,000 to $10,000 depending on the grades, the prices, and what we're sending, of course. So that's what's fun about this is being able to send one grading order and potentially make thousands of dollars of profit. Now, there's no guarantees here. You still got to do the work. You got to find the clean copies of these cards. But that's the power of grading at these higher levels. But it all starts with the metrics. It's a math problem. It's not a gut feel thing. So start with the data. Make sure you're finding cards that have strong metrics. Look at the gem rate. Look at the value and the upside there. That's what I like to start with. And then you could see kind of how I go through and sort of filter out certain cards based on where we are in the year, the player's experience level. The other thing that I want to call out is how many established players are on the list. And a lot of times those are the guys that the card market is already looking for. So it just makes it easier on the back end when you already have a high liquidity player, someone that's just going to be easy to move once you get your grades back. Now, keep in mind, we just walked through some of the cards from today's coin data, but coin actually updates multiple times daily, and new cards are always popping onto the list as the data changes. So if you want to give it a try to help you find cards that are going to be worth submitting, even at that $80 grading level, you can grab a free trial in the link in the description and see what you think. Otherwise, guys, I hope this has been helpful, and we will see you on the next video.